Hi, this is Anita Hummel from the Dusty Roads podcast about living life as a global citizen. I spent over 30 years of my life living and working in mainly Asia. So if you're looking for some inside information about what it means to be a global citizen, you are in the right place. This is Anita from the Dusty Roads podcast. This is episode 2. Today my podcast is about lessons learned about love and sacrifice as I've been in many of the factories here in Asia. I spent a lot of time in factories here in Asia to get products ready for export, to ship to mainly the United States. We manufacture home decor and home furnishing products for my company, Mindoro. As I've been in many of these factories, I've seen many of the laborers who, many of them do menial work. Many of them also have a smile on their face and they're happy to just be working, to do any kind of work. Well, I was once in a factory in China. I asked the factory manager a bit about some of these workers that are doing some of this menial kind of work. He pointed out to me that they were migrant workers in his factory. And as they paid for their food each day, they would take their daily bowl of rice and they would cut the bowl of rice in half, eating half the rice for lunch and saving the other half for dinner. The rice is relatively cheap. These migrant workers wanted to save every single cent they could, if it was even just a few pennies, by cutting their bowl of rice in half. Most of these same migrant workers that were working in China came from some of the poorest parts of China. They came to many of the larger cities to seek employment where they knew they would be doing the most menial work, but where they also knew that they could earn more income by working in these larger factories. They cleaned the toilets, sorted out the garbage, washed the floors and windows. They spent all night outside in the cold and dark. They would guard a building or guard a factory. They had little hope of ever rising above their station in life. And most of them spent their entire life doing these menial labors. They did not have the education for even the most basic manufacturing or basic skills. Many of these migrant workers were considered to be at the very bottom of China's labor force, but yet they were willing to sacrifice every day, even their bowl of rice, so that they would have a little bit more money to send home to their families. They had a hope that the second, the third, or even the fourth generation would have more opportunities than they would ever have. They understood that when you're born into poverty in a third world country, it is challenging to get out of that poverty cycle. And so a great sacrifice of love is required, even to forgo eating their daily bowl of rice and to saving half the bowl of rice from lunch for their dinner. In the West, we can learn something from this. We can, of course, learn lessons about sacrifice, about giving and caring about your posterity, about caring about those you maybe have never met in life. They understood that sacrifice is love, love is sacrifice. A couple things about these migrant workers was that they gave up their hometowns. For a lot of them, they went to these new city and where the language wasn't the same as their language, because there's many, many dialects of Chinese. So they had many different, they didn't always understand the local dialect of where they were at. They would see their families usually only once a year. They would go home during the Lunar New Year time. For some of them, it could take them a week or longer to get home. They would go on a train, or they'd have to take a bus. They'd have to maybe go by road. They might have to hike up mountains. It could take them a long time. So they missed seeing their children growing up, and their children hardly knew them. They gave up completely their way of life so that their families could have a better life, or that their children could get an education. Mitch Albom, the author of The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, said, "Sometimes when you sacrifice something precious, you're not really losing it. You're just passing it on to someone else." That's kind of how these migrant workers thought about it. That they were not losing something, they were sacrificing something, but they were passing something on to someone else in life. That because of it, they were able to pass on to their children the gift of an education or gift of a better life. My grandfather would always insist on eating the burnt toast. Not because he could not afford to to toss out the burnt toast, because he certainly could have afforded it, but because he refused to waste anything, even the burnt toast. He also felt by insisting to eat the burnt toast that others would not have to. When we love another human being, we should freely give to them without expecting anything. It was said that giving does not only precede receiving, it is the reason for it. It is in the giving that we receive. One of the things that I really love about these Chinese migrant workers was that they were willing to sacrifice for the next generation. They were willing to sacrifice for their children so their children could get an education. They knew that they didn't have much hope of rising above their station in life, but they knew that they'd probably be spending their life cleaning toilets or doing this type of work. But they knew it was for their children. Gaylord Nelson, an American politician environmentalist from Wisconsin, said, "The ultimate test of man's conscience may be his willingness to sacrifice something today for future generations whose words of thanks will not be heard." This is the kind of sacrifice that these migrant workers are making. They may never get thanks for it. And in fact, their children or grandchildren may never really thank them for it. But they were willing to sacrifice even half a bowl of rice so that their posterity could have a better life than they had. They will go down in history as a group of uneducated, unknown men and women of little significance. It is that knowledge that makes this sacrifice so much more powerful. They are making this great sacrifice for one reason: love. Love for a generation they may never know. Many times we may feel that our love for someone else is not appreciated or reciprocated. We may love a child or a spouse or even a parent, and they may decide to go in a direction in life that we may disagree with, or they may treat us in a way which is unworthy of love. We may feel discouraged or upset, and we may feel that our love and our sacrifice is a waste of time and effort. But love and a silent sacrifice for another person is never a waste. When we love someone, we should be willing to sacrifice for them. Love without sacrifice is not really loving at all. This is what these migrant workers in China have taught me. They've taught me what it means to sacrifice and to love for another person. They taught me the importance of sacrificing without thinking of getting anything in return, but sacrificing because you love. I hope that we can all learn from these migrant workers and learn how important sacrifice is and love is. We may not have to take our bowl of rice and cut our bowl of rice in half so we only eat half for lunch and half for dinner. We may not have to have that kind of sacrifice, but there are other sacrifices we can make. Sacrifice of our time, sacrifice of our money, sacrifice of our attention, sacrifice of reaching out to another person, sacrifice of calling someone, even though they may not have called you back for a long time, to just say, "Hey, how are you? I care about you." And how much better this world would be if we all tried to sacrifice a little bit and sacrifice like these migrant workers do, that we may find our bowl of rice and whatever it is, cut it in half and sacrifice because we love. If you'd like to check out, we have a blog on this from A Bus on a Dusty Road, which is called Life Lessons About Love and Sacrifice from Manufacturing in Asia. Again, you can find a lot of other great articles on our blog. Thank you so much for joining and being part of our community. This podcast is sponsored by A Bus on a Dusty Road, a blog about living life as a global citizen. Please go to our blog at abusonadastyroad.com and sign up for our free newsletter. If you've enjoyed this podcast, give us a thumbs up, leave us a review, and help to pass this along. Thank you so much for listening.